4 in the morning. That's when they came for me, not with badges or warrants, with crowbars and sledgehammers, attacking my dock like it was some kind of enemy fortification. You know that sound when metal scrapes against stone? It cuts right through your sleep, makes your teeth ache. I rolled out of bed, bare feet hitting cold hardwood, and stumbled to the window overlooking the lake. 2 figures in matching pink sweatshirts were dismantling my boat dock, piece by piece. Karen Miller and her mother, Dorothy Miller, twin devils separated by 30 years, but joined by pure, concentrated entitlement. Karen, the younger one, was maybe 45, blonde hair pulled back in that aggressive ponytail that screams, "I want to speak to your manager." Her mother looked like Karen's evil twin from the future. Same build, same walk, same way of holding her shoulders like the world owed her something. "Illegal structure!" Karen shouted, swinging a hammer at my boat shed. The sound echoed across the water like a gunshot. "This is an emergency removal." I'd lived on this lakefront property for 15 years. Bought it from old Pete Henley after he moved to Florida. The dock came with the house. Hell, it was older than both these women combined. But there they were, treating it like some kind of public menace. My hands were shaking as I pulled on jeans and boots. Not from fear, from rage. Pure, white-hot fury that starts in your chest and spreads through your arms until your fingers won't work right. You ever feel that? Like your body's getting ready for war before your brain catches up? I stormed outside, gravel crunching under my feet. The morning air was sharp with the smell of lake water and diesel exhaust from their truck. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Dorothy looked up from where she was prying boards loose with a crowbar. Her smile was all teeth, no warmth. "Official business, Thomas. Emergency removal of an unpermitted structure." Unpermitted? I snatched the paper from Karen's hand. Municipal letterhead, all official-looking seals and signatures. Emergency order for immediate removal. Violation of Shoreline Protection Act. "This is my property. That dock has been here since illegally," Karen cut me off. She had this way of speaking that made every word sound like a personal insult. "Your family's been squatting on public watershed land for decades. We're just correcting the oversight." The truth hit me like ice water. This wasn't about permits or regulations. My property sat right between their million-dollar lakefront lots, the only thing blocking their view of prime water. They'd been eyeing this land for years, dropping hints about development opportunities and community improvement. Now they were taking the direct approach. "You can't just—" "We can and we are." Dorothy straightened up, crowbar still in her hands like a weapon. 48 hours to voluntarily remove the rest, or we come back with the county. They climbed into their matching white SUV, of course they drove matching cars, and disappeared down the dirt road, leaving me standing among the wreckage of what used to be my morning coffee spot. Pieces of dock floating in the shallows like broken dreams. I stood there in my pajama pants and work boots, watching the sun come up over water that didn't feel like mine anymore. The worst part? They had papers. Official papers with stamps and signatures that made their theft look legal. Have you ever felt completely powerless? Like the rules of the game changed overnight and nobody bothered to tell you? That's where I was standing, in the ruins of 15 years of peaceful mornings, watching my neighbor's ambitions float away on the current. The sound of engines woke me up the next morning. Not one engine, 4 of them, diesel-powered and getting closer. I looked out my bedroom window and felt my stomach drop to my boots. 2 county trucks, 1 sheriff's deputy, and a crew of workers in hard hats were setting up a perimeter around my driveway. Karen and Dorothy stood in the middle of it all, like generals commanding an invasion force, pointing at my property and nodding to each other with satisfaction. I threw on clothes and jogged outside. The smell of hot asphalt and exhaust hung in the air like a threat. What's going on here? Deputy Morrison, I'd known him since high school, wouldn't meet my eyes. "Sorry, Thomas. Got an emergency work order. Unauthorized road through protected wetlands. Got to block access until environmental services can assess the damage." "Damage?" My voice cracked like a teenager's. "It's a gravel driveway. Been here since the 1980s. Karen stepped forward, holding a manila folder thick with documents. She'd dressed for the occasion. Power suit, clipboard, the whole 9 yards. "Environmental impact study shows your illegal roadway has disrupted the natural water flow, Thomas. We are protecting the ecosystem." The words hit like physical blows: environmental impact, illegal roadway, ecosystem protection, all fancy language for highway robbery, but wrapped up in enough bureaucratic ribbon to make it look legitimate. The crew chief, a sunburned man named Rodriguez, walked over with a measuring tape. "Sir, we need you to move your vehicle. We're putting up temporary barriers while the environmental assessment is completed." "How temporary?" Rodriguez glanced at Karen, then back at me. "Could be weeks, maybe longer." I watched them unload orange barriers and warning signs. "Do not enter." Environmental restoration in progress. My 15-year-old pickup truck suddenly looked like an intruder in my own driveway. "This is insane," I told Morrison. "You know this is insane, right?" He adjusted his hat. Till I remembered from when we were kids, and he was about to lie to his mother about breaking something. "Tom, I just enforce what the county tells me to enforce. You got a problem with the order, take it up with environmental services." By noon, they had turned my property into an island. Orange barriers blocked the driveway entrance. Signs warned of ongoing environmental remediation and threatened hefty fines for unauthorized access. The workers packed up their tools and left me standing in my own front yard, wondering how I was supposed to get my truck out or groceries in. Karen walked over as the crew loaded up. Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Nothing personal, Thomas. Just protecting our shared natural resources." "Our resources?" The words tasted bitter. "Lady, this is my home." "Your home, yes, but the watershed belongs to all of us." She gestured toward the lake like she was blessing it. Sometimes individual interests have to yield to the greater good. Dorothy joined her daughter, both of them studying my house like it was already vacant. "The county's prepared to offer fair compensation once the environmental review is complete," the older woman said. "Market rate for developable land, minus remediation costs, of course." Of course, they had it all figured out. Isolate me, make daily life impossible, then swoop in with a lowball offer dressed up as community service. The perfect legal mugging. That evening, I walked the half-mile to Jimmy's Tavern, the closest place with a phone that worked and beer that didn't. The bartender, Ray Collins, had been pouring drinks in this town since before I was born. He took one look at my face and set up a whiskey without being asked. "Heard about your troubles with the Miller women," he said, wiping down a glass. "Word travels fast in a town this size." "Word travels, but help doesn't seem to follow it." Ray laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "Son, those two have been planning this move for months. Dorothy's been asking questions about your property records. Karen's been cozying up to county officials. They didn't just wake up and decide to ruin your day." The whiskey burned, but not as much as the truth. "So everyone knew this was coming, except me?" "Not everyone, but enough." Ray leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Thing is, Thomas, they made one mistake. All that paperwork, all those environmental studies, they had to file them somewhere official, and official paperwork leaves trails." He slid a business card across the bar. "Mark Wolf, environmental contractor." Mark's the guy who was supposed to do their wetlands assessment. Emphasis on supposed to. Might be worth having a conversation. I pocketed the card and finished my drink, feeling something that might have been hope stirring in my chest. Maybe this wasn't over yet. Maybe the Miller women had finally bitten off more than they could chew. But as I walked home in the dark, flashlight beam dancing over those orange barriers blocking my own driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was walking into something much bigger and more dangerous than a simple property dispute. The question was, did I have enough fight left in me to see it through? The homeowners association meeting felt like walking into a courtroom where the verdict was already decided. 30-some neighbors packed into the community center, and every single pair of eyes followed me as I walked down the aisle looking for a seat. Karen had dressed for war, navy blazer, pearls, hair sprayed into submission. She stood at the front podium like a prosecutor, that manila folder of lies spread open before her. Dorothy sat in the front row, nodding along to every word like a proud mother watching her daughter's piano recital. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen began, her voice carrying that fake sweet tone that means trouble's coming. "We're here tonight to address a serious environmental threat in our community." Gerald Finch, the association president, banged his gavel like he was enjoying it. The floor recognizes Karen Miller to present the Environmental Protection Committee's findings. Environmental Protection Committee. That was rich. 2 weeks ago, Karen's biggest environmental concern was whether her lawn chemicals were strong enough to kill the neighbor's dog. Our investigation has revealed systematic damage to our watershed ecosystem, Karen continued, clicking through PowerPoint slides on a borrowed projector. Unauthorized construction, illegal dumping, and willful disregard for county environmental regulations. The first slide showed my dock, or what was left of it after their morning raid, but the photo was taken from an angle that made it look 3 times bigger, like some kind of industrial complex instead of a simple wooden platform where I used to drink coffee and watch the sunrise. This illegal structure has been leaching chemicals into our drinking water for over a decade, she said. The crowd murmured like a church congregation responding to a sermon. Pressure-treated lumber, metal fasteners, petroleum products from stored watercraft. I wanted to stand up and call it what it was. Complete bullshit. My dock was cleaner than most people's kitchen counters, but something in the faces around me made me stay quiet. These weren't my neighbors anymore. They were Karen's audience, and she had them eating out of her hand. The next slide showed water samples in little glass bottles, each one labeled with dates and GPS coordinates. Elevated levels of copper, chromium, and aromatic hydrocarbons, all traced directly to the illegal construction site. My neighbor Janet Cooper raised her hand. Karen, this is serious. Are our children at risk? We're taking every precaution, Karen replied, her voice heavy with fake concern. That's why we had to act so quickly. Sometimes environmental emergencies don't wait for lengthy legal processes. Environmental emergency. I almost laughed out loud. The only emergency was Karen's burning need to steal my land before I figured out how to stop her. Dorothy stood up from the front row, playing her part perfectly. I want to commend my daughter for her courage in bringing this to our attention. It couldn't have been easy, taking action against a longtime neighbor. The room erupted in applause, actual applause, for destroying my property and calling it environmental protection. Gerald banged his gavel again. The chair recognizes Thomas Mitchell for response. All those eyes turned to me again, but now they weren't just curious. They were hostile. I was the villain in Karen's story, the selfish neighbor who'd been poisoning their children's drinking water for 15 years. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling like water. That dock has been there since before most of you moved to this neighborhood. It was built to county specifications, inspected and approved. I've got the permits to prove it. Forged documents don't count as permits, Karen shot back before Gerald could stop her. We've verified with the county, no legitimate permits were ever issued for that structure. The lie hit me like a physical blow. I knew those permits were real because I'd helped Pete Henley get them back in 2009. But standing there in that room, watching my neighbors' faces turn from suspicion to disgust, I realized the truth didn't matter anymore. Karen had gotten there first with her story, and first impressions stick like superglue. 48 hours, Gerald announced, consulting a paper that Karen had obviously prepared for him. Voluntary compliance with the removal order, or the association will petition the county for forced remediation, all costs to be borne by the property owner. The meeting was over before I'd even figured out how to fight back. People filed out past me without making eye contact, like I was carrying some kind of contagious disease. Karen and Dorothy packed up their presentation materials, chatting quietly about their victory. I walked home in the dark, using my phone's flashlight to navigate around those orange barriers that turned my driveway into an obstacle course. The house felt different now, not like a home, but like a target. That's when I found the business card Ray had given me. Mark Wolf, environmental contractor, the man who was supposed to have done their wetlands assessment. The man who could blow their whole story apart if I played this right. But first, I had to figure out how to get to him without a car, trapped on my own property like some kind of environmental prisoner. Sometimes the hardest battles are fought on ground you thought was safe. I walked the 3 miles to Mark Wolf's office the next morning, carrying my desperation like a backpack full of rocks. His business was tucked between a tire shop and a payday loan place. Not exactly the kind of neighborhood that inspires confidence in environmental consulting. Mark himself looked like a man who'd been carrying someone else's secrets for too long. Maybe 50 years old, with the kind of deep tan you get from working outdoors and the kind of worry lines you get from working with people you don't trust. Thomas Mitchell, I said, settling into the plastic chair across from his desk. Ray Collins said you might want to talk. Mark's jaw tightened. He glanced toward the window, then got up and pulled the blinds closed. You're the lake property guy, the one with the dock situation. That's me, though situation feels like a polite word for whatever the hell this is. He sat back down, drumming his fingers on a file folder that looked suspiciously thick. Tom, can I call you Tom? What I'm about to tell you could cost me my business license, maybe more than that. I'm listening. Mark opened the folder, and I saw copies of environmental reports, soil samples, water analyses, all stamped with his company's seal. 3 months ago, Karen Miller hired me to do a comprehensive environmental assessment of your property. Specifically, she wanted documentation of ecological damage that could justify emergency remediation. My heart started beating faster. And what did you find? Nothing. Absolutely nothing. He spread the reports across his desk like evidence in a murder trial. Your property is cleaner than most. That dock of yours, it's actually providing habitat for smallmouth bass and helping prevent erosion. If anything, removing it would cause environmental damage. I stared at the papers, trying to process what he was telling me. But Karen showed water samples at the meeting, chemical contamination, elevated metals, the whole 9 yards. Mark's laugh was bitter. Those samples came from the industrial drainage pond behind Miller's shopping center, the one they've been trying to clean up for 5 years. Karen just relabeled the bottles and changed the GPS coordinates. The room felt like it was spinning. She faked the whole thing? Worse than that, she threatened me. Mark pulled another document from the folder, a letter on Miller Properties letterhead. Said if I didn't play along with her environmental concerns, she'd make sure I lost every municipal contract in the county. Her family's got connections in City Hall, County Planning, State Environmental Office. Cross them, and you don't work in this business anymore. I read the letter twice, each word hitting like a small explosion in my chest. Karen hadn't just stolen my property. She'd turned my own neighbors against me with fake science and bought-off experts. So you went along with it? Mark's face flushed red. I was going to. God help me, I was actually going to falsify those reports. But then I got to thinking about my kids, about what kind of man I'd be if I let them destroy an innocent person's life for money. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small digital recorder. That's why I recorded our conversation when she tried to bribe me. Insurance policy, you might say. He hit play, and Karen's voice filled the small office, crystal clear and unmistakably incriminating. Mark, we need documentation showing environmental damage. I don't care if you have to be creative with the data. Tom Mitchell's property is blocking a $20 million development deal, and environmental cleanup is our fastest path to acquisition. The recording was 15 minutes long, Karen laying out the entire scheme: fake water samples, forged environmental reports, bribes to county inspectors, even plans to have the property condemned as a health hazard once they owned it. Jesus Christ, I whispered when it finished. She's been planning this for months. Longer than that, there's more. Mark pulled out another file, this one marked with the county seal. Your property sits on what used to be a federal wildlife refuge. It was decommissioned in the 1960s, but the environmental protections were never officially lifted. Any development bigger than single-family residential requires Fish and Wildlife Service approval. And they don't have that approval. They don't even know they need it. Karen's so focused on stealing your land through environmental regulations, she never researched the federal restrictions that would kill her development project anyway. Mark leaned back in his chair, smiling for the first time since I'd walked in. The woman's so busy being clever, she outsmarted herself. I felt something I hadn't experienced in days. Hope. Real, solid hope that maybe I wasn't completely powerless after all. What do you need from me? Nothing. I've already contacted Fish and Wildlife Service. Federal environmental crimes trump local property disputes every single time. They're sending investigators tomorrow. Tomorrow? The word came out like a prayer. Mark nodded. Karen Miller thinks she's above the law because she's got the county in her pocket. But federal agents don't answer to the same people she's been bribing. They're going to want to see her development site, her environmental assessments, her water samples, all of it. I stood to leave, feeling lighter than I had in weeks, but Mark caught my arm before I reached the door. Tom, when this all comes out, it's going to get ugly. Karen's not the type to go down quietly, and she's got more resources than you do. You sure you're ready for that fight? I thought about my destroyed dock floating in pieces on the lake, about walking 3 miles in the dark because I couldn't get my own car out of my own driveway, about 30 neighbors looking at me like I was poisoning their children. Mark, I've been fighting this battle with one hand tied behind my back. Tomorrow, I get both hands free. But as I walked home in the afternoon heat, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen Miller had one more card to play, and knowing her, it was going to be a nasty one. The sheriff's car pulled into my block driveway at 6 in the morning, red and blue lights cutting through the dawn like angry fireworks. I watched from my kitchen window as Deputy Morrison climbed out, followed by Karen Miller and a man in an expensive suit I didn't recognize. My coffee cup trembled in my hands. This wasn't a social call. Morrison knocked like he was trying to break down the door. "Thomas Mitchell, Sheriff's Department." I opened up to find 3 faces that meant serious trouble. Karen looked like she'd been up all night, makeup perfect, but eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion or rage. The suit was older, maybe 60, with silver hair and the kind of confidence that comes from winning fights other people don't even know they're in. "Tom," Morrison said, not meeting my eyes again, "this is District Attorney Richard Carlisle. He needs to ask you some questions." Carlisle stepped forward, all business. "Mr. Mitchell, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit environmental fraud and bribery of a county official." The words hit me like a physical punch. "What the hell are you talking about?" "You have the right to remain silent," Carlisle continued, pulling out handcuffs. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." I looked at Karen, and her smile was pure venom. "Did you really think we wouldn't find out about your little arrangement with Mark Wolf, paying him to falsify environmental reports, bribing him to lie about our water samples? That's insane. He recorded you trying to—" "Mr. Wolf came forward yesterday evening," Carlisle interrupted, snapping the cuffs around my wrists, cold metal, tight enough to bite. "Admitted to accepting bribes from you to fabricate evidence against the Miller family. Very civic-minded of him, really." The world tilted sideways. Mark had flipped on me. The one person who could expose Karen's lies had just handed her the perfect weapon to destroy me instead. "That recording?" "What recording?" Karen's voice was innocent as Sunday school. "Mr. Wolf explained how you convinced him to stage that conversation, make it look like we were the ones breaking the law. Very creative, Thomas. Almost worked." They marched me out to the patrol car like I was some kind of dangerous criminal. Neighbors had started gathering. Janet Cooper, old Pete from down the road, even the Hendersons from across the lake, all of them watching Thomas Mitchell get arrested for environmental crimes, just like Karen said he would. The county jail smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. They processed me like a piece of meat, fingerprints, photos, paperwork. The holding cell was a concrete box with one bench and a toilet that looked like it hadn't been cleaned since the Reagan administration. I sat there for 6 hours before my court-appointed lawyer showed up. Jennifer Hayes, maybe 30 years old, with a briefcase that looked older than she was, and the tired expression of someone who'd already lost too many cases like mine. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm not going to lie to you," she said, settling onto the bench beside me. "This is bad. The prosecution has a cooperating witness, documented evidence of bribery, and a strong environmental case. They're talking 5 to 10 years. It's all lies. Karen Miller set this whole thing up to steal my property." Jennifer sighed. "That's what they all say. Look, your best bet is to plea bargain. Admit to conspiracy, pay restitution. Maybe you do 18 months instead of a decade." 18 months. By the time I got out, Karen would own my land and probably have her development half built. She'd won completely. Not just my property, but my freedom, my reputation, everything. "I want to call someone," I said. "Your one phone call was used to contact me." "Then I want to make a deal with the prosecutor." Jennifer's eyebrows went up. "What kind of deal?" That's when I realized Karen Miller had made her first real mistake. She was so focused on framing me, she'd forgotten about the federal environmental crimes she was actually committing. The fish and wildlife investigation that Mark had triggered was still happening, whether Mark had flipped or not. Tell Carlisle I have information about a federal environmental crime, Fish and Wildlife Service violations, endangered species habitat destruction, the works. But I only talk if I walk. Jennifer looked skeptical. Tom, if you're just making this up to buy time, I'm not. Karen Miller is about to find out that county corruption doesn't protect you from federal investigators. And when those agents show up at her development site tomorrow morning, she's going to need someone to blame. The lawyer left, and I spent another 4 hours in that concrete box, listening to the clock on the wall tick away pieces of my life. But for the first time since this nightmare started, I felt like I was playing offense instead of defense. Karen thought she'd checkmated me, put me in jail, destroyed my credibility, turned my own evidence against me. But chess games aren't over until the king falls. And tomorrow morning, the federal government was going to remind Karen Miller that there are bigger kings on the board than county district attorneys and small-town environmental committees. The question was, would I still be in jail when the hammer finally came down? The jail cell door clanged open at 7 in the morning, and District Attorney Carlisle walked in, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight. Behind him came two people I didn't recognize, a woman in a Fish and Wildlife Service jacket and a man with federal agent written all over his posture. Mr. Mitchell, Carlisle said, his earlier confidence completely gone. These are Special Agent Rodriguez and Inspector Chen from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. They'd like to speak with you. Agent Rodriguez stepped forward, her badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Mr. Mitchell, we understand you have information regarding federal environmental violations in connection with the Miller Properties Development Project. I looked at Carlisle, whose face had turned an interesting shade of gray. Am I still under arrest for environmental fraud? Those charges are being reconsidered, he muttered. Dropped, Agent Rodriguez corrected firmly. The charges are dropped. We have more pressing federal matters to discuss. They led me to an interview room that smelled like burnt coffee and desperation. Inspector Chen spread aerial photographs across the metal table, satellite images of Karen's proposed development site, marked with GPS coordinates and federal survey boundaries. Mr. Mitchell, are you aware that the Miller Properties development site encompasses 14 acres of protected federal wetlands? I stared at the photos. Karen's future shopping complex and luxury condos were outlined in red marker, overlapping almost perfectly with areas marked Federal Wildlife Refuge, Protected Habitat. I had no idea it was that extensive, I said truthfully. Agent Rodriguez pulled out a thick file. Yesterday morning, we executed search warrants on Miller Properties offices, Karen Miller's residence, and the development site itself. What we found was enlightening. She opened the file to reveal Mark Wolf's original environmental reports, the real ones, showing my property was clean and Karen's development site was an ecological disaster waiting to happen. Mr. Wolf contacted our office 2 days ago, Inspector Chen explained. He was concerned about being pressured to falsify federal environmental documents. When he recorded Ms. Miller's bribery attempt, he was actually working with our investigators. The room started spinning. Mark was working with you? The whole time? Mr. Wolf is a federal contractor. When someone tries to bribe him into falsifying environmental reports that will be submitted to federal agencies, that becomes our jurisdiction very quickly. Agent Rodriguez smiled grimly. Ms. Miller thought she was buying silence. Instead, she bought herself a federal conspiracy charge. They showed me more evidence. Financial records proving Karen had been bribing county officials, falsified water samples with chain of custody documents, even emails discussing how to eliminate the Mitchell problem through manufactured environmental violations. The county district attorney was not aware of the federal investigation, Inspector Chen said, glancing at Carlisle, who was sweating despite the air conditioning. Some of his enthusiasm for prosecuting your case may have been influenced by campaign contributions from Miller Properties. Carlisle looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. I had no knowledge of any federal investigation. If I had known, you would have done your job instead of taking bribes. Agent Rodriguez's voice could have cut steel. Mr. Carlisle, you're looking at your own federal charges for corruption and obstruction of justice. They released me at noon with apologies and a business card in case I wanted to pursue civil rights violations. I walked out of that jail into sunshine that felt like freedom, past news vans and reporters who'd caught wind of the federal investigation. Karen Miller was being led out in handcuffs as I reached the parking lot. Our eyes met across the chaos of cameras and shouting reporters, and for just a moment, I saw something I'd never seen in her face before. Fear. "This isn't over, Thomas," she shouted as they loaded her into the federal transport van. "You think you've won, but this isn't over." Dorothy Miller stood beside a black sedan, looking older and smaller than I'd ever seen her. The woman who'd helped destroy my dock with a crowbar now looked like a broken bird, watching her daughter disappear behind bulletproof glass. I could have said something cruel, should have, maybe. Instead, I just walked past her toward the bus stop, ready to go home to my lake property that was finally, truly mine again. But Karen's words echoed in my head as I watched the federal van disappear down the street. This isn't over. Something told me she was right about that. Women like Karen Miller don't just disappear quietly into federal prison. They leave behind scorched earth and burnt bridges, and they always have one last card to play. The question was, what kind of damage could she do from behind bars? 3 weeks later, I was rebuilding my dock with lumber paid for by the Federal Restitution Fund when Mark Wolf pulled up in his truck. He looked different, lighter somehow, like he'd been carrying a weight that was finally gone. "Tom," he called out, walking down to the water's edge. "Mind if I lend a hand? Least I can do after putting you through hell." I handed him a hammer. "You were working with the feds the whole time. Could have told me." Mark started driving nails with the practiced rhythm of a man who'd built things all his life. Couldn't risk it. If Karen had suspected I was wired, she would have found another contractor, and you never would have gotten justice. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the sound of hammers echoing across water that looked cleaner somehow, more peaceful. The orange barriers were gone from my driveway. The environmental warning signs had been replaced with federal crime scene tape that was slowly fading in the sun. "What's going to happen to her?" I asked. Karen, 27 federal counts, including bribery, conspiracy, environmental fraud, and racketeering. She's looking at 15 to 20 years. Mark paused his hammering. Dorothy took a plea deal, 5 years probation and full restitution. Apparently, she rolled over on her daughter faster than a pancake on Sunday morning. I thought about that for a minute. Karen Miller, the woman who'd tried to steal my home with fake science and bought judges, would spend the next 2 decades in a federal prison cell. Justice, served ice cold. But there was something else Mark wasn't telling me. I could see it in the way he kept glancing toward the road, like he was expecting someone. "What else?" I said. Mark set down his hammer and looked me straight in the eye. "Tom, there's something you need to know. The federal investigation didn't stop with Karen. They followed the money trail, the web of corruption she'd built. County commissioner, 3 city council members, 2 state environmental officials, all of them taking Miller Properties money to rubber-stamp development projects. How many people? 19 indictments so far, including District Attorney Carlisle." Mark's smile was grim. "Turns out Karen Miller wasn't just stealing your land. She'd been buying and selling local government for the better part of a decade. You weren't her first victim, just the one who finally fought back." A car pulled into my driveway, a sedan with government plates and 2 people in suits. I recognized Agent Rodriguez from the jail interview, but the man with her was new. "Mr. Mitchell?" Rodriguez called out as she approached. "This is Inspector Williams from the FBI Financial Crimes Division. We'd like to ask you a few questions about victim compensation." It took an hour to go through the paperwork. The federal government had seized Miller Properties assets worth $43 million. After legal fees and administrative costs, victim compensation would be substantial. Enough to not just rebuild my dock, but to live comfortably for the rest of my life without worrying about property taxes or maintenance costs. "There is one thing," Inspector Williams said as they prepared to leave. "Ms. Miller has requested a meeting with you, prison visitation, says she wants to apologize." I looked out at my lake, at the dock Mark and I were building together, at the peaceful water that reflected sky instead of worry. "Tell her I'm busy." After the agents left, Mark and I finished the dock as the sun set behind the trees. It was stronger than the original, built with better materials and designed to last through whatever storms might come. That night, I sat on my new dock with a cup of coffee and watched the stars reflect in water that belonged to me, legally, federally, and forever. No more orange barriers, no more environmental emergencies, no more Karen Miller. But I'd learned something during those weeks of hell. Home isn't just the place you live, it's the place you're willing to fight for. And sometimes, fighting for it means discovering you're stronger than you ever imagined. The lake was quiet except for the gentle sound of water lapping against the dock posts. Somewhere in the distance, a loon called across the water, wild, free, and completely unaware that its habitat had almost been turned into a shopping mall. I raised my coffee cup in a small salute to that loon, to Mark Wolf's courage, to federal agents who still believed in justice, and to the simple truth that sometimes the good guys actually win. Karen Miller had been right about one thing. This wasn't over, but she'd been wrong about who would be standing at the end. Some battles are worth fighting, even when you can't see how you'll win, especially then.